politics is public education, and as I said in my speech, it's not good enough to do the right thing. You have to try to explain what you're doing and bring people along and hopefully win over the skeptics if you're going to be successful. And as a teacher, you have lots of constituencies. It's not just your students, but the fellow members of your faculty, the administrators, the community members. You have to figure out how to be effective in your relationships and communication to all of those different disparate groups. So the challenge is to convey the material in a way that is understandable to people and hopefully brings them along, and developing the relationships that help make you successful as an educator. So that's the first part. Well, being a history teacher, I should tell stories. When I first was teaching in the early 1970s, I taught on the south side of Chicago, and it was in the midst of impeachment hearings of Richard Nixon. And I would go home every day and watch TV or listen to the radio or the summary of the impeachment hearings, and then go back and talk to my students about what it meant for the legislature, the Congress, to be involved in the impeachment of the President of the United States. So, I think being a student of history always informs the lens through which you view the present and the possible future. And that's been extremely helpful to me, I think. Hopefully you sometimes are able to see patterns in the way things are developing as a result of your knowledge of history, and that helps you. It's predictive sometimes of paths you might take or shouldn't take. And look, I love history. In my view, as everybody else study history and love it. Yes. But I think it's been really helpful to me just to have a larger context for the work that we try to do.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
May I ask as a follow-up, what do you think that Northeastern Illinois University might do to better prepare students for servant leadership? It sounds like one of those things might be to have them take more history classes.
Start there.
Well, this is true of our high schools. I'm not so sure it's true of our universities, but when I was teaching, and this is a while ago now, full disclosure, I haven't been in the classroom for 40 years, but when I was teaching, we taught civics. I'm not sure high school students are taught civics these days.
Nope.
But, it's sort of how government works, at the local level, the state level, the federal level. What are the responsibilities of each branch of government? I think for a lot of our young people these days, they don't have that basic knowledge, and that's a real challenge. Again, we have to have an educated, informed citizenry if we're going to have a strong democracy. So whatever we can do to support civics, both in the classroom and civic engagement, we have to try to do.
Thank you.
In his 1967 speech, Where Do We Go From Here, Martin Luther King Jr. Urged the nation to establish a universal basic income as a means to foster material and psychological well-being. In 2023, you became co-chair for Counties of Guaranteed Income, a group which advocates for universal basic income. What do you think are the specific material and psychological benefits for universal basic income?
Okay, well, let me talk a little bit again about our program. It's $500 a month for 2 years for 3,250 families. But we had almost 300,000 people who applied for our 3,250 slots. I think it was 280. We'll round it up. But anyway, clearly, lots and lots of people in Cook County were eligible for our program, and we didn't have the resources to meet their needs. So, as you point out, Dr. King, more than 50 years ago, spoke about the need for a guaranteed basic income. So did the Black Panthers. What they said was, basically guaranteed income or guaranteed employment for everyone. Mm-hmm. And we're the richest country in the world. This is something we should be able to manage. So those of us who believe that the federal government ought to provide a basic income, a floor for all of our residents, need to do what we can to sort of move that idea along. And so our pilot program, which we've used federal resources to pay for, will continue with our own county resources when the 2-year pilot is up. But we're part of a national movement to try to make the case that this is something the federal government ought to do. Mayor Tubbs in Stockton, California, who started Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, tried it for a year when he was mayor of Stockton. And what they found, of course, is that people were more financially stable, that they invested in food and shelter and education for themselves and their children. They were in a better place psychologically, because they weren't so stressed about their economic survival. And we expect to see some of the same results. And we have a partner in the University of Chicago. We have a control group, just like we do in a medical study, that's similar to our participants. And we're going to see where each group lands at the end of this 2-year period. But in my view, we're helping not just the individuals in the program, but we're helping make the case nationally for the federal government to make this kind of investment.
Thank you. Karina, would you like to ask another question?
Yes. So, according to Tulane University climate change expert Jesse Kennan, the Midwest is likely to receive an influx of climate refugees in the upcoming years and decades due to sea levels rising, wildfires destroying parts of the nation, and southern temperatures becoming unbearable. Time magazine echoed this point in an article entitled, "Go Midwest, Young Man," noting that regions of fresh water and distance from the coasts makes it better suited for a life in an era of climate change. How are you and others in the county government thinking about climate change, both in terms of adaptation and the possibility of mass migration to the region?
Well, first of all, I mean, we have a tremendous resource. We're in the middle of the country, away from coastal impacts of climate change. We sit next to the Great Lakes, which have 1/5 of the fresh water in the entire world. I spoke earlier about the fact that I was at this press conference this morning where we got money from the federal government to do research around clean water, cleaning wastewater, and looking at water as a tremendous natural resource. So we have, in the center of the country, we have a pretty mild climate, and we have a lot of fresh water. And a lot of other places in the country can't say that, and are disadvantaged, relatively speaking, to us because of those things. Now, we've seen in much of the previous century people moving from the Midwest to the South or to the West. And so I think the fact that people should be drawn back to the Midwest because we have these advantages in an era of climate change is kind of a little restorative justice. Now, we're working on solar energy, and we've made a commitment to being carbon neutral, I think by 2050. I think it's 2050. Anyway, we're ahead of our goals in terms of decarbonizing, lessening our carbon footprint. So I'm pleased with that. We, as I said, we have a solar initiative to support what we call community solar, getting individuals and communities to commit to solar energy and helping them get the equipment they need to do that. So, first of all, I think our advantages of geography and climate and access to fresh water will in fact be a magnet over time to people as they find other environments more challenging. If you think about the fires on the West Coast or the drought in parts of the Southwest, the Midwest looks pretty good under those circumstances. And we have to continue to invest in alternatives to fossil fuels. And here in the Midwest, we not only have wind power, but not as much sunshine as other places, but we can use solar energy again to meet our needs that were previously met by fossil fuels. So we're trying to do some of that.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you, President Preckwinkle. I would like to open up the floor for 1 or 2 questions from the audience at this point. Would somebody like to ask President Preckwinkle something? I see a hand down there on the right.
How you doing? So I'm actually a former student here.
All right.
10 years ago, got my bachelor's in social work, went on to get my master's in social work. I recently, about 2 weeks ago, at my own daughter's home, who is also a student here, with a group of 14, 15, 20 to 19-year-old youth. They were all homeless, and they were all staying with my daughter, who me and my husband financed her apartment. And I was surprised because I thought it was a joke. You guys are in here having a party. Stop playing with me. But as I go into their apartment and I saw all of their personal belongings, I asked myself, why are so many 19 and 20-year-old African American youth? There were maybe 2 young men there who I asked to leave, just because they were, youth. What do you mean you guys are homeless? What do you mean you guys are, don't have nowhere to go? And I think the conversation I got, my title of profession is a therapist. So I actually not necessarily tried to wear a hat that day, but I tried to figure out what can be done to help not just my daughter who opened up her home, which she shouldn't have, to all these youth, but what can I do to assist and help so many youth that's on the streets of Chicago who are really struggling. And one of the 3 young girls that felt comfortable talking to me actually said, your daughter said you're a social worker. Don't social workers help? But she didn't understand the concept of my job or what I do. So I guess for me, at 41 years old, I would like to know, President, what can I do in the form of, whether it's a political arena, a community arena, that I actually can help more instead of just, like you said, cash is available, but not each and every one of them can apply, or I can't financially give each and every one of them somewhere to live. But what can we do more? Because my daughter, being a college student, can barely afford to attend college. And I don't know what I want to say, but I want to do something.
Well, there's an advocacy organization in our region called the Coalition for the Homeless, and I would suggest that you be in touch with them about the work that they do. We have some terrible challenges with homelessness in this country. For one thing, you can age out of our Department of Children and Family Services system at 18. Well, there are not a lot of 18-year-olds that are able to just move into the adult world and be able to support themselves. It's 18, not 21. So we need to change the law about when you exit the child welfare system, so that it's later than 18. I would suggest 21, but anyway, that's one thing we need to do. We also need to change our attitudes toward young people who are part of the LGBTQ community, because a number of people end up homeless because their parents are unwilling to accept their sexual orientation. So that's a challenge as well. So there's advocacy around that. And I think you need to talk to your legislators about these issues, right? Legislators can't do anything about the fact that parents kick their kids out because they're part of the queer community, but they can do something about changing our laws about what happens to wards of the state. And by the way, the Department of Children and Family Services puts young people in our juvenile temporary detention center when they can't find homes for them. This is a disgrace that we all ought to be ashamed of. So I guess I'd say organizations you could connect to, talk to your legislators, and support organizations that provide services to the homeless. In Cook County, we use some of our federal resources to buy transitional housing and then give it to not-for-profits to run, to serve people who are unhoused. So that's Connections in Evanston and Housing Forward in Oak Park. And we're looking for sites in the south suburb where we can buy facilities and turn them over to not-for-profit organizations to run on a long-term basis. But again, this is one of these challenges. We're the richest country in the world, and we got people sleeping in our streets or couch surfing with their friends.
Thank you for that response. We're much appreciative, and thank you for taking the time to answer our questions and at least one good audience question. I'd like to turn it back over to Professor Farzani